I thought to myself that there's a story here that I can share with the world. And this isn't advice I'm giving people. It's just my perspective. You can't make mistakes when you write about the things that matter to you most. And it reminded me that creativity is something we find time for, right? It's something we make space for. And that's what I've been doing with my writing. The way you treat yourself is a mirror of how you're going to treat other people.
And we're recording. Boris Cho, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Victor. It's nice to see you. It's been a while.
You know what? I was actually looking back at it, and the last time you were on was episode 44, and this is going to be I think it's going to be episode 142, if I've got it correct. So here you are, like 98 episodes later.
You know what? That sounds really crazy to me because that means I've seen or listened to every single episode you've done. So since I become a guest the first time, you converted me into a fan. I had to follow you, and I'm just so impressed with the quality of the content and the guests that you bring onto this podcast. It's been amazing. I've learned a lot, and yeah, just like I don't know if you hear this often, but I just want to thank you personally for doing what you do, putting a spotlight on all these tremendous people doing amazing things and giving them a platform and sharing that space with them. So thank you.
Boris, I thank you. That was a wonderful compliment. I appreciate it. It really touches me that you follow the podcast and you're getting a lot out of it and that you enjoy it. So, look, but hey, let's jump into you though, because you've got something interesting with it we're going to share today. And so, you are my third guest. I'd say you're my fourth or fifth author, but this is the third time someone's come on to promote a book. So let's jump right into it. We're going to go into your new book. I am here to fulfill my destiny. Let's start with the title because that is a very, very, very stoic title.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you're going to appreciate this. So, do you remember that show called Heroes?
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
done by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale.
Yeah,
Uh,
it was like we're talking mid 2000s. It was kind of like what if Smallville had it didn't have a big hero brand behind it and had more of a network budget behind it.
yeah. So there was this character, Hero, who was my absolute favorite, and
Yes.
his ability was to manipulate time and space. There was one line in the show that always had stuck with me, and that was the title of my book. He went on screen and he said, "I'm Hiro Nakaruma, and I'm here to fulfill my destiny." And ever since then, I fell in love with that line. And I've used it as a tagline for all my like social media accounts. If I'm signing something for somebody, I always end it with that. So it's just kind of stuck with me. So when I was thinking about a title for my book, it didn't take me long to go back to revert to that particular phrase, and it felt so fitting because of the context of my book. It was a lot about what I would like the man I used to be, the man I am today, and the man I'm destined to become. So when I thought about the title of my book, it was just fitting.
Okay, so let's go back a couple of places there. So writing this book, doing my due diligence on it, this really comes from a place of vulnerability. Like you're really opening up to the world with this book. So let's go right back to the beginning and the conversation you had to have with yourself about that, saying, okay, there's a lot that I'm going to put out in the ether that I won't be able to get back. Was that a tough decision for you? Or did that factor into whether or not you go with the book versus maybe keeping it to yourself?
Yeah, so I am here to fulfill my destiny. It didn't really start off as a book, right? It sort of started off as survival. I was journaling for many years, And, the one thing about journaling for those who journal is that you go back and you read the entries that you've written like months, years ago. And, that's to me is the process of reflection and, understanding how far you've come in your journey. So for me, it was about reading all of the hardships that I had gone through, health wise, divorce and separation, growing up as an immigrant, just wanting to fit in as, a regular Canadian kid. And then life was sometimes scary as a kid because there was so much uncertainty when you didn't understand the culture or the language. And, I faced a lot of racism growing up in a small town about 40 minutes away from Toronto. And, you know, having to reflect back on all of those moments, um, I thought to myself that there's a story here that I can share with the world. And this isn't advice I'm giving people. It's just my perspective. And after having put together the manuscript based off my journaling and my poetry, I felt there was a part of me that, felt very vulnerable, because like, now I saw my entire story, in 300 pages, and I had read it over and over again, and then what I did was I shared it with a couple very close friends, and I said, "Hey, listen, this is something I had put together, and, I just wanted your take on it, should I share with other people?" And then the feedback was that, "Boris, this was really beautifully crafted and it comes off so human and insightful, that it would be a shame if I didn't share that story with other people." Uh,
Mm.
so the vulnerability piece for me wasn't when I, had finished writing the entire manuscript. It was when I started to consider publishing this and started to reach out to publishers. And once I got interest from publishers, that's when the fear and vulnerability really started to kick in.
Did you find that because you had written everything down, it was a little bit easier to cope with? And here, let me add something into that as well. Did you find after writing down something that was traumatic in your life, you've already referenced a couple of things like dealing with racism, growing up in a small town, uh, your separation and your divorce. Did you find that you would look back after it was written down and maybe after the second or third time you read it, you all of a sudden said, "Hey, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was." Like, it still might be very traumatic, but it's not the trauma you thought it was prior to writing it down.
Right. Okay. So, writing has become like a way for me to make sense of everything that I was like going through. And it definitely helped me cope with those challenges and reflecting back, reading those journal entries. It, there was a sense of resilience. There was a sense of like accomplishment, that, we go through things in life and, we don't have the tools and resources to really fully understand how to, resolve these challenges. But what's helped for me was when I write something down and, time has passed and I go back and read them, it makes me feel really good about, all the strides that I've made.
Let's talk about the writing experience. This is something I was talking to Courtney Kosak about, previous author who was on the show a couple of episodes back. And I think it's really important to talk about how you approach that because if there's other people listening or watching this who have got an idea for a book in their head, sometimes they might have difficulty getting it out. So let's start first with, it sounds like this book you've been writing for a number of years. We already know that there was something in there because you gave the manuscript to your friends to see exactly what they thought of it, but you just started journaling. How old were you when you started journaling?
So on and off, I journaled quite a bit as a teenager, writing lyrics and poetry. That was one way of me, understanding my feelings or communicating feelings. But it started casually, but it didn't stay that way. Journaling was already part of my life. But once I committed to the book, it became more of a discipline, not like a forced discipline, but it was very intentional. Um, so, uh, As a teenager, it was easy for me to, lock myself in a room as an aging emo kid and, put my feelings down on
Did you
paper.
just say aging emo kid?
Did, yeah, an aging emo kid. Um, yeah, I would identify myself as an elder emo for sure. Still love the music. Um, but, as a teenager, you know, the music helped, but like writing my own music and my own lyrics through poetry was a means for me to communicate how I felt in the moment. And that practice sort of I carried with me throughout like my young adult life and right up until today. Yesterday, I spent a few hours reading and writing. And you get this sense of um, fulfillment, really. Well, once you get into the groove of things, and that's sort of the discipline I was talking about. It's not forced. It's incredibly intentional, and in a sense, very therapeutic.
Well, let's talk about the 4 pillars of your book. So we've got love, we got resilience, we've got values, and we've got spirituality. Like, did I nail them all? All 4 of them?
You got them. I'm
Oh,
sure if you dig deeper, there's a lot more themes, but love, resilience, values, and spirituality definitely encompasses a majority of the writing in my book.
love's a pretty broad term. In what perspective do you take on love? Are we talking about the love for a father and his daughter, romantic relationships, just greater family? What angle were you taking there with love?
Yeah, so in my book, the theme of love looks different in many ways, right? It is romantic love that I write about. I write a lot about the love between myself and my daughter, the love and bond and connections we grow with our friends and our family members. So it's a bit of everything.
And speaking of the love for your daughter, correct me if I'm wrong, part of the reason you put this book together was you wanted to share what you've experienced with her, and you thought that this was the best way to really present it to her.
Yeah, thanks for picking that up, and I appreciate you asking this. So, it wasn't until the book was completed, until I had this like clarity that I wanted her to one day read this book of mine, not as like a perfect story, but as a human one, right? To really understand that life isn't about figuring it all out, right? It's about how we move through uncertainty, how we protect our peace, and how we
Mhm.
build ourselves when things fall apart. And I thought, one day she's going to read this book with mature clarity and really understand some of the things that her dad went through and how he's overcome some of like life's biggest challenges.
And it's interesting too because, I mean, if she does she journal right now?
And so, she doesn't journal. She does some writing, and she loves arts and crafts. So she's a very creative person. And most people wouldn't know this unless you picked up the book and read the entire book. But one day I was going through her old schoolwork. And, so I pulled out the old duo tanks and I started just to reflect back on like how far she's come. Um, and then I stumbled across a couple pieces of poetry that she had doodled on her duotang. And so I took a snapshot of those her poems, and I snuck them into my book. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, yeah. So I remember when my book was completed, the publisher had sent me an author's copy, and I had them address it to my daughter Macy, and not to me. So when this envelope arrived, I grabbed it and I picked her up from school. And I told her, honey, you've got some mail here. I'm not quite sure what it is, but let's go sit down, take a look. And so she opens the envelope, this big yellow envelope, and she pulls out the book and she immediately recognizes that, hey, it's my book. It's the book you've been working on. And so we sat there and we went through some of the pages. And as we were skimming, I looked for her poetry. And when I found one of them, I had asked her to read that one out loud to me. And she immediately recognized it. And she said, wait a second, this is my book. So there was a moment of that we shared where it was just really beautiful. Everything sort of came full circle. But I don't think she really comprehended like the significance of this up until I told her that she was probably the only fifth grader in her entire school that was a published poet. So yeah.
There we go. First line in your LinkedIn profile for your daughter Macy,
Yeah.
published poet.
Mhm.
Are you looking forward to the moment when, and maybe she's already done this, where she reads it, maybe understands it more on an adult level, and she looks at some of the things that she was present for that you endured and gets a chance to share it with you and say, Dad, I see why you went through it that way. But by the way, while you're going through it, here's how I viewed it from the lens of a young girl.
Yeah, I one day welcome that conversation, and in fact, I look forward to it. I do talk about some pretty sensitive, mature topics in my book, but I recall when I was putting together the manuscript, I would read it out loud at nighttime, and eventually she would, ask me what I was reading. And then when it came to bedtime, she would ask, "Hey, can you read a piece of your book to me?" And so I would read some of my book to her, and I wasn't sure if I was offended or not because she would fall asleep pretty quickly.
Oh,
I
God.
I don't know if it was the soothing calm of my voice or it was just really boring to her. But but
Boris, you do have a rich baritone voice.
Thank you. But this happened consistently for months where she would request me to read my book right before bedtime. So she understands a piece of it, but there's another part to the book where I don't think she's going to fully really understand the context until she's a bit older.
Let's talk about pillar number 2, resilience. Did you find after you finished writing this book, or at least specific journal pieces or journal entries, I should say, that that specific topic that you were covering, you were a little bit more resilient to that? Like, you felt that if you had to face it again, you already knew that you were going to have the mindset to get through it a lot better.
Ye Yeah, here's the thing, resilience is a common theme that keeps popping up in my book, and when I was reflecting back on some journal entries, it was a no-brainer that this was gonna be a big part of, how I wanted to show up in the book, right? 'Cause I very rarely did I used to sit down and write a journal entry when I had a really great day. Of course, that did happen, but, I was hunkered down writing a lot more when I was having a terrible time, because that is how I process and that is how I make sense of some of that chaos. So when it comes to resilience and my book, really it's a celebration of survival, if I'm being honest. I mentioned this earlier. Growing up as an immigrant in an unstable home, learning how to navigate fear early in my life, staying in a marriage longer than I should have, and finding the strength to finally leave. Becoming a single father and realizing that the most important thing I'll ever build isn't a career, it's her, it's a human being, right? And then there's the quieter journeys, right? The journey into therapy and into spirituality, understanding feminism as a, you know, as a male, not just equality, but like as a broader system of dismantling the structures that limit people. But all those paths, what they do is that they don't come with milestones or recognition, right? But they shape who we become. And I feel like in the spirit or theme of resilience, looking back, I've overcome a lot of these things with a lot of mature clarity. Um, and I would say that resilience is one thing that anybody would pick up from the book if they were to read it.
There's something that you said in there, and I've had this conversation with other people. So going back to our careers, everyone wants to be a leader. I shouldn't say everyone, but everyone wants to have that sort of leadership role. And one of the badges of honor is having direct reports. But no one ever looks at a parent and says that that is really the ultimate leadership position. Like, your kids are your direct reports. Like, instead of employees that you might be trying, I don't know, you might be trying to encourage or groom to be a little bit better in email and the boardroom and so forth. Like, you've got this human being, and the impact, productive or otherwise, that they're going to have on society is really pegged to you as a parent.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I want to share that being a parent is the most favorite part about who I am, right? It's given me um it's been very generous to me. Being able to relive my childhood through, my daughter's experience, giving her the love and care that I feel like I didn't receive as a child. Holidays look so much different now as a parent than it did when I was a child. And really, the idea of, leadership and parenting, that there's a lot of common similarities in in both roles, right?
Mhm.
We play a role as a mentor. We play as a role as a leader. So, one day I want my daughter to understand, how she should be loved and cared. Based off of how I love and care others, right? There's a direct correlation to how she sees my interaction with people and in her understanding of how she should be interacted with.
And on to pillar number 3, values.
Yeah, so values are just one of those things that we all have. We either create them ourselves or we inherit them based off of those around us. I have this philosophy that if you take the five closest people around you, the that could really define who you are and what you value. And when I look around the closest people to me, whether it's my daughter, my best friends, my brother, my sister, they all embody characteristics and values that I admire and respect. Um, so I wanted to make sure that that was being interpreted in my book. That, there are certain things that I value as a human being, as a brother, as a friend, as a partner, and a parent. Um, and I think that, you know, we should be talking more openly about the things we care about and how we want to show up in the world because it demonstrates who we really are as people, and it really, that conversation I feel can influence a lot of positive change, especially those who struggle with their own values, because maybe they grew up in a very religious home and they don't really understand
Mm.
what that means to them, or they grew up in a part of the world where things look a little different than they do here. So, I've been reading a lot of books about values, about how other people show up. And I knew off the bat that this is something I wanted to incorporate in my book. That if one day my daughter was to read this book, that she did, there would be no question what my values were.
Did your values change though as you were writing the book? Like, not that you changed your values, but as you were writing the book and going through your journal entries, which were over a certain space of time, did you find as you got towards the end or you were reviewing earlier journal entries, you're like, huh, I don't completely think like that anymore. Or I sort of do, but I don't. You know what I'm saying? Because those are values are completely fluid.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I wouldn't say that my values had changed. Like,
Or maybe evolve would be a better term.
yeah, so I would say it definitely evolved, they strengthened, right?
That great way of putting it.
Yeah, so more specifically, they strengthened, my self-respect, right? How I valued myself. There are values about how we want to be treated by others, but we do very rarely talk about how we want to treat ourselves.
Mm.
So, in terms of like the evolution of my values, it was more about how do I protect my inner peace? How do I have more self respect for myself? And ultimately, at the end of the day, how do I love myself more? Right. So, having written the book, there's a very clear message in there about, i- it is worth protecting your inner peace, that inner child, revisit that person, and learn to love yourself because the way you treat yourself is a mirror of how you're going to treat other people.
Very strong words. Okay, and you already touched on it slightly under values, but kind of a belated segue into the fourth pillar, spirituality.
Yeah. So, full disclosure, I didn't grow up religiously. Like, so this is actually surprised some people. So both my parents are full-time missionaries. They're
Really?
Yeah, they're but they're
I don't
they
think we covered that in the previous podcast. I would
I
have
know,
remembered
right?
that.
So they both become ministers. They live overseas in South Africa doing missionary work. They've been doing that
Wow, okay.
almost 20 years. But growing up, we were forced to go to church, and it was one of those things where I didn't quite understand why we were doing this. Why do we have to go? And so I wouldn't say I'm a religious person. I'm definitely a spiritual person. And this is a bit of a new journey for me, I would say, in the last 6 years. I've been studying the Buddhism ideologies. I've been really looking at things with a more open mind. Um, so spirituality to me is less about religion, and it's more about awareness. It shows up in how I parent, how I listen, how I respond instead of react. Practices like meditation, mindfulness, and even therapy, they've helped me to slow things down. And because life moves so fast, but meaning doesn't live in speed, right? And that's something I've come to learn. It lives in presence. So for me, spirituality is less about religion and more about living in the present moment. And as a dad, that's really everything, right? Being a parent isn't just about being there physically. It's about being emotionally available, grounded, and very intentional. And spirituality has a huge hand in helping me do that.
I could use some pointers on meditating. Every time I try it, my goldfish attention span kicks in,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking about just about anything and everything.
Yeah,
Did you
I
f
do that all the time.
Okay, mm,
Whenever the topic of meditation comes up, there's always at least one person that says, "How do you do that? I can't. I can never focus."
yeah,
Sometimes you just need something to focus on, right? There's a huge misconception that meditation is all about blocking things out. But for me, meditation is about sitting with my problems, sitting with my thoughts,
okay.
right? And focusing on what's going on around me. One thing that's really helped me in like getting into a routine of meditating is using guided meditation as a form of practice. There's a lot of great, YouTube channels, Spotify accounts out there that provide free guided meditation. And that's a really good way to start. And listen, you don't have to be meditating for an hour. It could be a few minutes, it could be 10, 15 minutes. But there's a sense of clarity and a sense of accomplishment once you come out of that meditation. It's very relaxing, therapeutic, and and it's really a moment of gratitude once you complete that meditation. You kind of start to see the world a little differently, even if it's just for a moment. Those moments increase the more you do it.
Let's talk about facing your fears, because this is something that you write about and you encourage your audience to face their fears as well. Bit of a loaded question. Was there a particular fear that you faced head on and conquered while writing this book?
That's a big question. When it comes to fear, it's a fear's just an interesting topic, or it's something that nobody teaches us. We just learn it as a baby. We don't have those, you know, clarifying moments of that's the moment I learned about fear. But like we're all born to be scared of falling,
Mm,
right? Um, so, you know, eh, and some people overcome fears quicker than others. For me, I'm still scared of heights, I jump when I see a spider, um, you know, but when it comes to fear, I, I, I find it more as a tool for inspiration to challenge and motivate me to try to overcome what that fear is, right? Growing up in an unhappy home, there was a lot of uncertainty and fear of like, well, what the repercussions be? What were the consequences of, making a mistake? So for me, fear has always been a big part of my life, and I've always been trying to solve for like how I overcome these fears. And sometimes the answer to that is not about overcoming the fear. It's about living with it, right? And
Mm.
understanding yourself, and figuring out ways to be better prepared when these moments happen. So creating that space for uncertainty that fear may arise, um, i- getting into a better practice of that has helped. In my book, I talk a lot about, you know, the fear of, leaving a marriage. What's the optics going to look like for, my ex's family, or what are my friends going to think?
Or what would your daughter think as well
E
too?
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that was a big one that, we both had to navigate together, so we had to come together as a team. It felt like it was a hard thing to do at first, but, one thing I've come to understand is that, like, once you put your children first and both parties are doing that,
Mm.
gonna be okay, right? So, fear just showed up in so many different ways for me, but for me, it was all about how do I live with it, opposed to like really trying to overcome it and conquer it.
All right, Boris, you've got to have a copy of the book. I've just realized we've been talking, we haven't seen it yet. So throw it up on screen.
There's always a copy in my office
There's
here.
always a copy.
So
There we
here it
go. I'm
is.
I'm here to fulfill my destiny. And okay, is that the Canadian made tag that Indigo has? Chapters Indigo puts on it?
That is
That
so.
is you can
My book
where can we get the book?
My book is available, uh, all major bookstores across Canada, and also available on Amazon. And some independent shops in Toronto will carry the book as well. But your best bet is go to Indigo or Amazon.
And we're going to put those links in the episode description. So whether you're on YouTube or you're listening to the audio version of it, you'll be able to grab the links where you can pick up a copy of it. One thing I wanted to close with on the book. This was something that I had raised with one of my previous guests who was an author. And it was like, you've poured your heart into this book. There are a lot of really intimate and, in some cases, traumatic details in there. Then it gets pushed over to an editor, and how do you take the feedback from the editor? Like, does the editor say, "Hey, Boris, sorry that this happened to you growing up, but can you change the wording and tighten it up a little bit? I think we're going to lose the audience here." And then how do you like, if that does come up, how do you like not lose your mind when you're just like, did you just tell me to tighten up my trauma and pace it differently because it'd be more enjoyable?
That's a great question. Okay, so I feel like I need to provide a bit of context here. So, although always been an element of writing in my professional career, whether it's responding to RFP proposals, creating narratives and strategy, and some corporate comms, um, I've never really considered myself as a writer, and those who journal probably wouldn't either, because a lot of it is point form or just a few sentences here and there of how you're feeling. So when I finished my manuscript and had shared it with some of my friends, the feedback was like, holy shit! Like this is pretty good. It's really inspiring, and you should really share it with other people." Um, and that gave me the confidence, the courage to be like, you know what? Maybe I'll self-publish the book. And then
Mm.
one of my closest friends said, why would you self-publish it? Why don't you just actually send it to some publishers and get feedback? Well, worst case scenario, they say your book's not good enough, but we enjoyed reading it. And then self-publish it and get, other people's take. So initially I had shopped my manuscript to about six publishers, and five out of the six publishers responded with interest to working with me.
Okay,
So
that's a good number.
that's a really good number.
Yeah, that
Well,
you've
I
got
was
options
really
there.
surprised. I was incredibly surprised. Um, so it was hard for me to nail down which publisher I wanted to work with, but I narrowed it down to a Canadian publisher based out of Montreal. They're called Ace of Swords. I looked through their catalog, and their library of books that they published resonated with me. There was a lot of memoirs. There was a lot
Mm.
of poetry, and after meeting with the publisher, I was just really excited about the fact that, hey, listen, I get to work with a Canadian publisher who's gonna help me put this book out into the world. So when it came to the editing process, uh, in my line of work, I work with a lot of legal documents, and sometimes we're redlining certain, language, and we're sending it back to the client, back and forth. I've never seen so many red lines in my entire life
Oh,
when I got back my book. But here's the thing: I wasn't offended. I think I had a moment of appreciation that somebody would thoughtfully read every single word that I had written and suggest a better way of saying it. And to me, um, there was a sense of appreciation, but also it taught me that, I'm not a great writer. Although I love writing, I wouldn't consider myself a great writer. Not at least in this case. I'm getting better, and I'm continued. I've never stopped writing since the books come out. So it's given me a sense of purpose to refine and that craft of writing, to just get better and better.
okay. So before we bring it home with rapid fire questions, help me understand how the entire process of writing and publishing this book has influenced or improved your professional skills, your professional life. Because last time you were on the podcast, episode 44, you were at, well, I thought it was Orion when we were doing pre production work. It was
Yeah, it's
actually
at
Midas. It was
RTP.
Midas. Yeah.
It was Midas. Okay.
And now let's bring it full circle because you've had a couple of other agency stints. You tried your hand at sales before
Yeah.
deciding that wasn't for you. And let's talk about how that's impacted your career since then.
How the book has impacted my career,
The whole
or
process of like writing, because it's like you said you're not referring to yourself as a writer, but given the fact that you've gone on this journey, you've had that professional feedback from a publisher. I've got to imagine at the very least you're a much better writer, even though you
yeah,
still feel that you've got
I would
room to
agree.
grow, but you've got to be a lot better.
I agree because the act of writing for me has been a discipline, like an intentional discipline that we kind of spoke about, but it's built into my everyday routine where I wake up and the first thing I do is I have a gratitude journal. So I
Mm,
write three things that, like, I was grateful for the day before, and then at night I write my journals. And then throughout work, I'm constantly writing proposals, and you can see that the writing gets better. That you're thinking about ways of putting together a sentence or a paragraph, whatever that is. You get that awareness that your writing is improving. Absolutely, 100%. Um, and, I learned that discipline is a form of self-respect, right?
mm.
Especially when it comes to things that challenges us. And I also learned I generally love writing, right? I've always written in my career, but this writing, it came with no agenda. There was no client. There was no KPI, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, because that's
Yeah,
what we're always measured on in this industry.
it was just the truth about myself, and that's what I write about. Like, you can't make mistakes when you write about the things that matter to you most. And it reminded me that creativity is something we find time for, right? It's something we make space for, and that's what I've been doing with my writing.
Boris, this has been a fantastic chat. We're going to bring it home with rapid fire questions, and we're going to weave in some nerd content in there as well too.
Please,
Because
it would be weird
absolutely,
if you didn't.
if we didn't, so okay. So going into the first one, sorry, I usually have these memorized because I do the standard set, but because you're a returning guest, you get the evolving rapid fire questions because we can't do the original ones. So this one's going to kick it off for us. The 2026 movie that you are looking forward to the most.
Oh, okay. I could probably list a million movies. Not that a million would come, maybe millions would come out with all the streaming channels, but you know, a couple actually come to mind, and I thought about this because I knew that we were gonna nerd out for a moment here. So Brand New Day, the new Spider-Man movie, which the trailer dropped, I
Oh, that
believe,
was a great
yesterday.
trailer.
I
Yeah.
assume you've seen the trailer.
Might have seen it 6 times.
Yeah, I may have seen it a million times already.
Mhm.
Trying to pull out all the Easter eggs.
Yep.
Um, so Spider-Man Brand New Day excites me because we get to see the Peter Parker on the streets, right? This
Yes.
isn't a space adventure. This isn't a huge team up. although there are some cameos appearing in the movie, which are really exciting and very tied to the Spider-Man mythology. Um, I'm really excited to see this movie. I think that anybody who come from our world of comics
Mm,
have been waiting a very long time for this. Another movie very closely tied to Spider-Man is Doomsday, Avengers Doomsday. I'd imagine a lot of people, probably a lot younger than me, share this same sentiment. Is that like we kind of grew up watching these movies evolve, like.
mhm,
And we have a Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's gotten to the point where Robert Downey Jr. is Doctor Doom, and they've always planned this from the beginning. At least that's what the internet is saying.
mm.
um, I think we're at a cultural moment here. There's a lot of opinions out there about like superhero movie fatigue, but this is a movie that is absolutely necessary. I think that everything Marvel and Disney has been building is for this moment in particular. I don't know where the that franchise is going to go after this movie. I
Mhm.
imagine kind of spin-offs that won't be so successful. But this one is gonna be like the holy grail of superhero movies.
See, I'm really looking forward to Brand New Day. I'm with you on that, like the street level Spider-Man that we've been yearning for. And especially if have you read any of the rumors on who Sadie Sink is allegedly playing? Because they have kept that under wraps. Like she doesn't even appear in the trailer, although I
Yeah.
think there is one shot of her from behind with the hood up. Have
Okay.
you
So I
so
have my own speculation.
spoiler alerts in case anyone is listening or watching and doesn't want to know. We have no confirmation of this, but Boris, you go first.
I think we're gonna see a mutant. I think she's gonna play a mutant. I think she's gonna play an X-Men character, and I think it's gonna surprise a lot of people on screen when it happens, because what they're doing is they're bridging worlds together like they have with some of the previous movies, but this is making it absolutely real. Like, Spider-Man is a different character, right? Because as
Mhm.
we know, the rights, are shared with another, movie company, right? So the fact that they're making this happen, I think, is a really huge deal. But my speculation is that she's going to show up as a one of the X-Men characters.
You want to pick one?
I think it could be Kitty Pryde,
Really? You think Kitty Pride?
maybe. I don't know.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, or Rogue. Like, honestly,
I think she's Jean Grey.
you think she? Oh, yeah. Okay, that would make a
I
lot of
think
sense.
it's Jean
A
Grey
young
because
Jean Grey,
yeah.
with the red hair and all. Yeah, you know what? I think you're probably right.
Did you watch Wonder Man?
I have not watched Wonder Man yet.
Okay. Did you watch Ms. Marvel?
Yes, I watched Miss Marvel.
Remember how and even going back to Homecoming, did the Department of Damage Control? I would highly recommend watching Wonder Man as it's not a great superhero show, but if you watch it from the perspective of you remember the movie Birdman with Michael Keaton?
Yes.
So basically 2 really talented actors who are so flawed that those flaws get in their own way. In one case, arrogance, and the other one, substance abuse. If you watch it from that perspective, it's a great show. I'm
Okay.
not gonna lie, it's a great show, but the Department of Damage Control plays a part in that series, and they're kind of covertly trying to find superpowered beings that could be a threat.
Oh, interesting.
And the I mean, do you want another potential spoiler? It's an internet theory.
I've probably already come across it on the internet, but please, yeah, share.
The internet theory is that, Sadie Sink is being hunted by damage control, and the Punisher is protecting her, and that's
Cool.
how he gets woven into it because that's what the Punisher does. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm gonna disagree with you on Doomsday a little bit. Here's my concern.
Okay.
I was not a fan of, Deadpool and Wolverine. I felt that it didn't have a story. I felt that they got Hugh Jackman in, they paid him a truckload of money. Ryan Reynolds realized putting them together was gonna make even more money, and they
Yeah.
just threw as much nostalgia as they could at it. Like, if you asked me to pick one of my favorite Deadpool movies, it's the first one. I thought the first one was tight, well-timed, paced very well, and was just great and well cast, but I'm afraid that Doomsday will be like that. Like, one of the things that I was saying to one of my other guests, a friend of mine, Danny Weissman, who co-owns Obsessed Media in New York City, is that you and I, and him as well, because he's a nerd, he's going to be okay with me calling him that. We can deal with the multiverse a little bit. Like we like seeing Sir Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart come back and James Marsden in a proper Cyclops '90s outfit. But the casual fan,
Yeah.
they're the ones that's going to push this to $1 billion. The nerds aren't going to do it. The nerds will help you make a profit, but to get to that $1 billion mark, you need other people. And if they're coming into this going, why? All it takes is for them to be turned off by one movie, and then it's going to take them another 2 or 3 films to come back. Kind of like what happened with Dick Donner's Superman series. 1 was great, 2 was great, 3 was absolutely horrible. But because everyone saw 1 and 2, they saw 3 and was like, this is horseshit. And
I
like you,
Yeah, I don't know where they were going with the 3rd one. I felt
but
like stopped caring, right?
well,
It
what happened after was
almost felt it was insulting actually. Um,
well,
yeah, even number 2, I had problems with the 2nd Superman movie, but the first one was so good that I can overlook the next 2. But here's my take on Deadpool and Wolverine. I
okay.
think that movie was intended to be exactly how you described it. I don't think that this was like um gonna win awards for storytelling. I think that
I agree with you there. Yeah.
yeah, I think it was a product of nostalgia. I think it was a product of just making money, right? And I think it was, if anything, it was a slapstick comedy.
Hmm.
Marvel has this unique way of, playing in different genres, but with a red common theme of like thread of like this is a superhero universe, right? Like they can do horror, they can
Hmm.
do comedy, they can do romance. Um,
And then you've got different story tones with that as well. Cause like,
yeah,
did you watch the Punisher Netflix Punisher show, which is in the MCU?
yes,
It's dark as hell.
it's dark as hell, and and say I thought Daredevil was dark as hell as
Yeah, it
well,
was. I
but
mean, the opening scene in the first episode of the Netflix Daredevil series, it's human trafficking. Like that's what they open with. Like
right.
it doesn't get any darker than that. Well, it can, but that's still pretty dark.
But he where it comes to the Marvel television shows, I feel like it's straight out of the source material, and I feel like they get away with being more authentic on television than they do on the big screen, because on the big screen they've got to cram everything in 2 hours, right? And they're trying
Mhm.
to do way too much. Um, but I think that's just where we are in the world of movies today. I think we're in an interesting moment where nostalgia is just doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and we're trying to cram too many things in 2 hours, and we're losing sight of like what people really want. We want really great storytelling, and I think that Marvel television shows, those properties, they're giving audiences that. Um, yeah, but I love Punisher. I love Daredevil. Um, I think I would prefer the TV shows over the movies for sure. The Doomsday, I'm just really excited to see Fantastic Four, X-Men,
Mhm.
the Avengers all come together, and worlds are colliding and dying, and
Yeah,
it's just like a crisis on Infinite Earths,
that's
for
exactly what it is. Yeah.
Marvel. Yeah.
Okay, so you said 2 things in there before we go to the next rapid fire question, which is not rapid fire questions today anyways. You said something about nostalgia and heavy lifting. So your thoughts on He-Man?
Yeah, He-Man. Okay, so it looks cheesy, right? Everything I
It
read.
does, but it's unapologetically
Yeah, but
cheesy.
I think it needs to, right? I
Oh,
don't
it
think
does.
you make a serious He-Man movie where it's like a Game of Thrones.
Like a
He-Man.
Conan or something, yeah.
Exactly, right? So I don't even know if kids know who He-Man is, because He-Man has not like popped up throughout pop culture. Like, eh, I
They've
guess.
tried to resurrect him a couple times in the '90s through animated series, but essentially it's like the Filmation show in the early '80s, the Dolph Lundgren, movie, and that was it.
Yeah, I'm excited. I grew up watching He-Man. Like my earliest childhood memories was in my basement in Brazil, Sao Paulo. As you
Mm,
know, that's where I grew up. Um, sitting in the basement watching He-Man and Thundercats with my twin brother. And, we had the swords, like play fighting was everything, right?
Did you tuck it in the back of your shirt and pull it out and yell the power of Grayskull? I mean,
Yeah.
you have to.
Yeah. I think I was a bigger Thundercats fan than I was a He-Man fan. But I just recall those two were just instrumental at like our childhood. Like, yeah,
Okay,
He-Man.
let's jump to the next question. The 2026 TV show you're looking forward to the most.
Okay. So I'm gonna stick to sort of the theme here. I'm gonna talk about superhero shows. Um, Two come to mind. One is Garth Ennis's The Boys.
Mm,
Really looking forward to the new season.
and
Uh,
we're wrapping it up too.
yeah,
So
just big fan of that entire series. Love the books, and when I started watching the show, um, I loved it just as much. And that rarely happens for me, where I read a book and then watch whether it's a live action or an animated series, where I love them both equally. The Boys is a perfect example of like
mm,
character development, storytelling. It's got everything that I loved about the books, right? Um, so that's one. The second one is Invincible. Uh,
yes.
yeah,
Oh,
like Robert Kirkman is a brilliant writer. Um, e- that series, the book again, and the animation is equally um, so satisfying. The
mhm.
rewatch equally, yeah.
That one just dropped yesterday, episode 1 and 2, I think, Prime loaded up, and I have not jumped into it yet, but I'm so on that with you.
Yeah.
Okay, you're the head of a major Hollywood studio charged with remaking a previous film. Which movie would you choose?
Oh gosh, I get to make any movie I want. I can
You gotta
adapt
re you
anything.
gotta no, no, you gotta remake the movie. It's already out there. Come on, because we're in the era of reboots right now. So, Boris, the accounts have come to you and said, "We need a $1 billion remake."
Okay, so that's a tough question. So I'm a big fan of like 80s and 90s movies, right? Like in particular, like John Hughes movies, like The Breakfast Club. I love
Mm,
Uncle Buck. Uncle Buck is
that was a good one, yeah.
one of my favorite movies.
I'm thinking about the giant pancake already.
16 Candles. I don't think you can get away with some of the jokes in 16 Candles like you can today. There's some undertone like racism in there that's like, but I think it worked for the time, but I don't think it could
You
fly.
kinda have to deal with it head on, kinda like the Dukes of
Maybe that's my challenge. Maybe I remake 16 Candles for the modern age.
I mean, they did it with Dukes of Hazzard. There was a scene explaining the General Lee and how they were, the General Lee had the Confederate flag on the hood or the top of the car, and they were like,
Oh, they
"Ooh, this is
explained it in
awkward."
the remake?
It just kind of gets there, and then they're stuck in traffic, and someone is yelling, "Racist, what are you doing?" And they're, like, looking at Johnny Knoxville, and I forget who the other guy was. Oh
Okay.
god, his thing was Stifler. They're looking at each other, and then they climb out of the car, and they're like, look at the top, and they're like, "Oh, no," and they make a face, and they climb back in, and that's kind of their nod to the audience going, "Look, we put it in there for nostalgic reasons, but we understand that this is a very dated, object or flag."
Okay. I'm gonna change my answer.
Yeah, change your answer, go for it.
I'm gonna pick weird science. I would remake
Okay.
science. In the age of AI, with the technology we have today, with consumer understanding of robotics and, you know, I think I would pick AI, and I think you could remake that movie where two teenagers program like the perfect person that they want to hang out with. Yeah, I think that would be comical. I think it would be um w- I think it would just be an interesting remake for sure. Yeah, I'm gonna stick to that. Weird science.
I'm surprised you didn't say Thundercats because that's been something that's been batted around in development hell forever.
Yeah, here's the thing. I there's certain properties I just don't think translate well to live action. I don't think
Mm,
unless you do like a trilogy, you couldn't tell the Thundercats story.
and
And if you try to do it in 2 hours, again, you're gonna get another Deadpool Wolverine where it's just gonna be cameos and plot holes. I don't want to be known to create that. I would rather convince children of today to go back and watch Thundercats. as it existed. And I recall this was a while ago, maybe 25 years ago, maybe they remade the Thundercats cartoon,
Oh,
and it was actually really good. I liked it. It made a lot more sense than it did back in the 80s and 90s because there was more storytelling in the remake of the animation than there was previously. All you need to know back in the day is that these guys come from another planet. They're all strong. They all have these different abilities. In the new animation, I feel like they tell a cohesive story, and there's a really good plot and narrative.
okay. So you're still that Hollywood producer, and now you're charged with adapting IP, fresh IP
Yeah.
to the
Okay.
silver screen. So what would you
Okay.
pick?
So this one is a no-brainer for me. So for those that know me really well, they know that I am obsessed with an anime called Naruto. So if I could adapt any fresh IP into live action, hands down, it'll be Naruto, but done properly. I would respect the source material, and I would build it in phases. I would actually do a trilogy, because at its core, like Naruto has everything I love about storytelling. It's a story about identity. It's a story about loneliness. It's a story about resilience, and it's deeply human. Um, I have never cried so much watching an animated show than I do watching Naruto. And I watch clips of certain moments and I get really emotional. And to me, that just means that I have fallen in love with these characters. And I would love to bring that property to life and justice. And I think that it's a story the entire world needs to hear and see.
You're the president of the United States, and you have got the files on your desk
Oh gosh,
proving
I
that
want that job.
no, proving that alien life is real. We have made contact. Do you declassify and share that with the public?
That's a good question.
Because you
Okay,
have to think
so
about it. You're on the outside going, "We need to know," but if you're on the inside and you can finally
yeah,
do that, you're like, "Ooh, do
so
they need
it's
to know?"
being the president of anything, and that comes with a lot of responsibility. So if you're the president of the United States, aliens are here. So okay, so if it's a matter of like global impact or safety, yeah, of course, 100%, you need to disclose it, right? Because truth, even when it's uncomfortable, it builds trust, and as a leader, that's your job is to build trust amongst your peers, right? And honestly, I think humanity might be more ready than we think, right? When it comes to like aliens showing up, I think if they were going to do it, it's going to be anytime soon. With everything going on in the world,
Mhm.
it's just another thing, right? Or at the very least, it would be one hell of a unifying moment for the world. I think if aliens showed up, we're all focused on what do we do together as a society, as a planet? How do we protect our home? So that could be really interesting. But I don't think I want that job. I don't
Boris, this has been a fantastic chat. We're gonna end things right here. Thank you so much for stopping by.
appreciate it, Victor. Thank you so much for having me again.